Job chapter number 8. We're going to begin reading in verse number 1. And we're going to go down to verse number 13. The Bible says, Then answered Bildad the Shuhite, and said, How long wilt thou speak these things? How long shall the words of thy mouth be like a strong wind? Doth God pervert judgment, or doth the Almighty pervert justice? If thy children have sinned against him, and he have cast them away from their transgression, if thou wouldest seek unto God betimes, and make thy supplication to the Almighty, if thou wert pure and upright, surely now he would awake for thee, and make the habitation of thy righteousness prosperous. Though thy beginning was small, yet thy latter end should greatly increase. For inquire, I pray thee, of the former age, and prepare thyself to the search of their fathers. For we are but of yesterday, and know nothing, because our days upon earth are a shadow. Shall not they teach thee, and tell thee, and utter words out of their heart? Can the rush grow up without mire? Can the flag grow without water? Whilst it is yet in his greenness, and not cut down, it withereth before any other herb. So are the paths of all that forget God, and the hypocrites' hope shall perish. All right, now in these verses, keep in mind, we're a couple of chapters in. We know all that befell Job. He lost everything that he had in one day. Okay. Then he was afflicted from head to the bottom of his feet with boils. Okay. Eventually, God gave the devil reign. You know, you can have everything but his life, right? You can touch his flesh. You can take all that he has. Just don't take his life. Okay, and then out of sympathy, out of not knowing what to do, and out of the pain that she's feeling for what's befell her husband, Job's wife looks at him and says, you know, what's the point anymore? Just curse God and die. Right? Why suffer anymore? Right? In other words, looking at that dog that's sick and, you know, you want to put it down, you know, it might just be better to put it out of its misery. That's what Job's wife's saying to him. Right? So then, we know that Job goes and he sits in the ashes. Okay, we know that, it takes potsherd. He starts scraping. But Job's friends. Okay, what a group of friends. Okay. I will say this, though. Job's friends did block off time. The Bible says that they set a time, they made an appointment that they were going to go, they were just going to sit with him. They sat with him for days without saying anything. They were there for him. I'll give them that. Right? They were more than just friends in word. When they didn't even know what to do for him, they said, we'll just go and we'll be with him. Right? They sat there. And I can't remember if we taught Sunday school on it or if it was the devotion, but the first of Job's friends that speaks to him, okay, as they're sitting there in silence for days, he said that a spirit came by and told him, well, what that spirit told him was different than what God says, so that means it wasn't the Spirit of God, right? And we taught on, or we did a devotion on listening to the wrong voice. All right, but now we get down to Bildad, the Shuhite. Okay, now, by way of introduction, I want you to notice a few things about Bildad. First, he is there because he cares about Job. Okay? Now, verse number 3, it says, Did God pervert judgment, or doth the Almighty pervert justice? If thy children have sinned against him and have cast them away for their transgression, if thou wouldest seek unto God betimes and make thy supplication to the Almighty, if thou wert pure and upright, surely now he would awake for thee. In other words, he said, Job, the reason that God hadn't said anything to you, obviously there's something between you and God. He's there because he cares about Job's spirituality. They say, Job, we don't know why this happened, but is God wrong? Does he, judge wrong? Does God pervert his justice? He's saying, has God ever done anything for the wrong reason? He's saying, so if God's always right, something has gotten in the way here. He's there because he cares about Job. But the next thing I want you to notice about Bildad, by way of introduction, is that he does think that Job is a hypocrite. Okay, look down with me in verse number 11. Can the rush grow up without mire? Now that rush, think of that as a papyrus reed. Okay, and if you haven't seen a papyrus reed, think of a very skinny bamboo, rod. Tallow in the middle. Okay? Mire simply means mud, the dirt, right? But it's specifically wet dirt. And we'll get to this here in a second. Then, he goes on to say that can the flag grow without water? The flag would be like bulrush, okay, the real tall, thin grass that grows up by the edge of water, again, in the mud, okay? Then it says in verse 12, while it is yet in its greenness and not cut down, it withereth before any other herb. Then he goes on to say, so are the hypocrites. But what's he talking about? Well, he's telling Job, he's saying, Job, you're one of them plants that's down there by the edge of the water. Okay, you're close to God, right? We know that water is a picture of, well, first the Word and then second the Spirit. Okay, we know that in order to grow, the psalmist said that, he'll plant me by the waters, right? That he maketh me lie down by still waters. We need to be by the water to grow. But he's also saying you got the mud, you got the thing in the dirt that you need in order to grow. Right? It's one thing to have the water. It's another thing to let the water impact you, give you the nutrients that you need in order to grow. But he's saying, but Job, you're like one of them rushes. You're like one of them reeds. What's he talking about? Well, what's in the middle of a papyrus reed? Nothing. It's empty. That bulrush grass, it tends to grow in a circular pattern. From the outside, it looks green. It looks healthy. It'll grow really quick, they say, of the papyrus reed. I don't know. I've never grown it. But I did a little bit of it. They say that it grows pretty quick. But it also, if you don't cut it down when it's ripe, it'll start dying a whole lot quicker than any of the other plants. Because there's nothing to sustain it on the inside. He's saying, just like the hypocrites. They have a form of godliness, but there's nothing on the inside. They're ever learning, but never able to come to the knowledge of truth. Now, it's very accurate description of the hypocrites. I'll give Bildad that. Okay, he is correct. Hypocrites are, they say that they're one thing, they're empty on the inside. But he's telling Job, you've lived a life that you claim to be upright and holy, but obviously you're empty on the inside because this is what's happened to you. Okay? He's saying you have or this has befallen you because you claim to be upright, you claim to be holy. We can read how Job had the ear or had the council of princes. They would come and ask Job, what should we do? Because they knew that Job claimed to be a righteous man. He claimed to be upright, wanted to fear God and eschew evil. So they would come and talk to Job when they needed advice. Okay, if those that were in power came to Job for advice, and now they see this befall him, just like Bildad, everybody else is saying, man, he was just another one of them that said that he had it. But if he would have had it, God wouldn't have let this happen to him. Okay, now, we know Bildad's a complete idiot. He got some things right, but he's wrong on most of this. Amen. Okay, Bildad had a little bit of knowledge, but he didn't have much wisdom. He couldn't discern what it was that God was actually doing in Job's life. Now, in all fairness, Job couldn't discern what God was doing in his life. Only God knew what God was doing in Job's life. Okay, and for all the chapters of Job until the very end, Job doesn't hear from God, but Job still just keeps doing what he's always done. Okay, but Bildad, ironically, was one of them hypocrites that he was trying to tell Job that he was. Bildad had the outward appearance of somebody that cared about Job. He had the outward appearance of somebody that knew a little bit, but on the inside, everything that he was giving Job, they were just empty words. Amen. They really couldn't help him. Right, so all that being said, and no, it's not a literal translation, but I want to teach on being a stick in the mud. Being a stick in the mud. Stick's not hollow like, a papyrus reed, but a papyrus reed, if it's ripe and you hit somebody with it, it's going to hurt a little bit like a stick. Okay, them bulrushes, they're thick enough that if you were to go walking by them or graze your hand against it in the wrong direction, it's going to cut you. Okay? But it's talking about withering and dying. That's what a stick is. It's not a branch anymore. Right? If it's not cut down and it's ripe and it's empty on the inside, it's going to die quick and it's just going to be stuck in the mud. Right? That's what Bildad is. Now, how can we come to the realization of that? Well, let's look at what Bildad thinks is important for Job to know. Okay, first off, look in, we've already read it, but if you were to look in verse number 3 on does God pervert judgment or pervert justice, okay. Verse number 4, if thy children have sinned against him, and he have cast them away for their transgression, if thou wouldst seek unto God betimes and make thy supplication to the Almighty, if thou wert pure and upright, surely now he would awake for thee and make thy habitation of thy righteousness prosperous. He say, Job, obviously your kids have sinned, and that's why God killed them. But we can go back to chapter 1, but for the second time we won't. Job made sacrifice daily for his kids in case they forgot to make sacrifices. Job's already thinking, well, this guy doesn't know anything about what he's talking about. The hypocrites will presume to know, the secret things or the hidden things, and then tell you about it with very little evidence. Now, as I was studying this out, Matthew Henry, the commentary on the Bible, I like his more than anybody else because he just uses the Bible to talk about what the Bible says. A lot of other people will say, well, we think that it, but Matthew Henry says, these extraordinary circumstances that befell Job does not necessarily mean that there was extraordinary sin on his part or on the part of his kids. Sometimes extraordinary hardship happens so that God's extraordinary grace can be made known. Amen. But Bildad didn't know about that. He just knew about God's judgment. He just knew that if something bad happened, it's because God's punishing you. Right? Bildad did not consider that Job had had bad days before this, but Job didn't let those bad days affect his upright standing before God. Job had had bad days. Everybody has bad days. But Job had never had a bad day like this. Right, sure. So Bildad thinks, well, we've never seen Job have a bad day before, which means he had always been, living right before God. The hypocrite will say, if you're right with God, everything will be okay. Nothing bad's ever going to happen to you. Right. That person's empty because the first bad day that they have, they dry up like these rushes and these reeds. They don't know what to do and they're dead real quick. Because they thought, well, I was right with God, so everything's going to be okay. But Job had had bad days, but it never outwardly shown that those bad days had an effect on him. Now the only reason that Bildad knows that Job's had a bad day is because Job doesn't even have a leg to stand on. Everything's been taken from him. Amen. Right? It's obvious that Job's having a bad day. Sure. So now he gets to come in and say, well, Job, obviously you thought that you were right, but obviously you weren't right. The hypocrite will make great jumps or great leaps in logic most of the time to make themselves feel better. Right. Amen. Keep in mind, we talked about this last week, that our life, we should live it to reprove or to rebuke the darkness of the world. Right. Amen. That our very actions should let the darkness know that darkness isn't the truth. That light is better than darkness. Amen. Right? But keep in mind, that's what Job's life did every day. Sure. Every day, the way that Job lived told Bildad, hey, maybe you can get a little bit closer. Maybe you could be a little bit more upright. Maybe you could eschew evil a little bit more. Or maybe your fear or reverence for God could be a little bit stronger. So now when everything falls apart, Bildad gets to come in and say, ha, I told you I was right. He's there because he cares about Job. He's his friend. But the words that he's saying aren't to make Job feel better. They're to make himself feel better. Yeah. Amen. He's saying, well, Job, you weren't right with God, because if you weren't right with God, there's no hope for me because I know I wasn't as godly as you. So obviously there's something missing. But Bildad has yet to understand that what's missing is in him, not in Job. But second, I want you to notice, Bildad, here in these verses, he doesn't care too much about what God has to say on the issue. He tells Job to go and seek the counsel of the fathers, of the elders of times past. Look with me, if you will, in verse number 8. For inquire, I pray thee, of the former age, and prepare thyself to the search of their fathers. For we are but of yesterday, and know nothing, because our days upon the earth are a shadow. Shall not they teach thee, and tell thee, and utter words out of their heart? What's he saying? Job, obviously you've messed up. So go seek to the elders. Go to the fathers. They've lived longer than us. They've got a little bit more wisdom. Go talk to them. Let them search you out and tell you what's wrong. Bildad is a hypocrite, claimed to be there because he was worried about Job's condition with God. But he doesn't point Job to God. He points Job to man. Now granted, keep in mind, in Job's day, Job was the first book of the Bible. He didn't have the written word of God. Okay? In a timeline, Job was the first book that was written. It's the oldest book of the Bible. But in his time also, people lived a whole lot longer. We can go back to Adam lived 900 years. Okay? Noah lived longer than most people, would even conceive of being able to live after he got off the ark than people do today. Okay? They lived longer, and because they lived longer, they'd seen a little bit more. Okay? And they had a little bit more wisdom. Okay? There is nothing wrong in seeking counsel as long as it is godly counsel. The reason that Job knew how to live right before God is because some people throughout Job's life had instructed Job, had trained Job up, just as Job had trained his children up on how to serve and walk right before God. But that's not what Bildad's telling them. He's not saying, go get to the elders and then seek out their wisdom on God. He's saying, go to the elders. Okay, he says, inquire, I pray thee, and prepare thyself to the search of their fathers. He's saying, let them nitpick every detail of your life and tell you what's not right with God. That is not man's job. That is God's job. That is our job to seek him, because those that seek him must be, must believe that he is a rewarder of them that do diligently seek him. We have to have faith that we're going to find God if we search for him, because he said, ask and ye shall receive, seek and ye shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. But nowhere in the Bible, nowhere up until this point in Job's life or throughout history, you can look at what God told Adam and Eve to do. Nowhere in there does it say that man is able to search out another man and find his faults or his sins before God. Man looketh on the outward appearance, God looketh upon the heart. Amen. Okay, but Bildad is more concerned about what man says than what God says. Never does he ask Job, well, Job, have you heard from God? Job, think back, you may not have heard from him now, but think back to the times that you have heard from God. What did God tell you then? Just stick by that stuff. No. He's telling Job, what you had wasn't going to work, so try what man can give you. Go to the elders, they're wise, which again, we can look, in verse number 9, for we are but of yesterday and know nothing, because our days upon earth are a shadow. That's true. Our life is but a vapor. Job does say, man's days are few and full of trouble. Amen. Right? There is truth in the fact that you may not have been around as long as somebody else. They may have a little bit of wisdom that they can share with you. There's truth in that. But again, Bildad is using that premise that, well, if somebody's older, they obviously know more about everything. So go before the elders, let them search you out, and they'll tell you why you're not right with God. He's not telling Job to pray or to fast or to, humble himself before God, to do everything that he can within his power to seek for God's will or his direction. Because again, even if he doesn't think that Job's right with God, the spiritual thing would be, go talk to God about it. But Bildad, he's not concerned about what God wants. He has put his faith in man, and now he wants Job to put his trust in man. Bildad has lived his life according to, well, what do these people say? Keep in mind, Job was the one that the princes came to and sought counsel of. What would the elders know that Job did not already know? Bildad's telling Job, you're an idiot, you don't know anything, go learn some things from these guys. He's not saying it in those words, but that's the meaning, that's the intent behind what he's saying. He's saying, all that stuff that you told, that was all worthless, it was all junk. All the wisdom that you've ever had was obviously empty because you've lost everything. Bildad thinks that Job's lost everything because he doesn't realize that Job's everything was God. That's the peril that Job went through, that he was separated. He could not find God. He looked before him. He looked to the left. He looked to the right. He looked behind him. He couldn't find God anywhere, and that's what gave him turmoil. Right. It wasn't that he lost everything. He knew that his children were right with God and that they were in Abraham's bosom or paradise. Right. He knew that. He knew that everything that he lost, God had already given it, gave it to him in the first place. It wasn't his. Lord give it, Lord take it away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Amen. Job is content in the fact that he can lose everything as long as he has God. The struggle that Job went through is that he went for so long without God giving him direction or saying anything. He craved the living presence of God in his life, and he didn't have it. That's what Job lost. Right? God separated himself to prove that Job, because of his love for God, would still serve God, even if God wasn't apparent and readily, visible in his life through what God was doing for Job. But Bildad thinks that Job's empty, just like one of them reads, because he's lost everything. But all that Bildad's showing is that he relies on things that can hold no water to fill himself. He's telling Job, go back to the elders. They'll give you something. But go seek to the wisdom of those that came before us. Go ask this wise man, or go ask that wise man, or the sages. Go receive counsel of man. And Job's saying, I don't need people to tell me I already know what to do. I've done it. Amen. Right? You're the hypocrite thinking that I've not done, or I'm missing something because I don't heed to what the elders could have been wrong. Bear in mind, how many generations was it from Adam until God destroyed the earth with water with Noah? Right? Man can get it wrong. Just because it survived doesn't mean that it's true. Many of the false religions today can trace back to pagan or to ritualistic worship that happened even in the Bible, but now it's got a different name on it. Just because it's lasted doesn't mean that it's true. But the oldest thing is that which God has taught us, right? Be ye holy, for I am holy. Amen. Can't do that with what man will give you, but you can do that by doing what God gives you, instructs us to do. Okay, but the final thing I want you to notice about Bildad is Bildad thought that Job religiously was wrong. The hypocrite will contentedly sit by the wayside, will watch your life, and the first sign of trouble, they'll jump in to try and tell you that you were the heretic. Amen, that's good. That you believed it wrong. Everybody knew what Job believed, because Job outwardly lived upright before God and eschewed evil. He hated evil things. And because of his position in the community, he was the richest man in the East before all this happened. Then he had twice as much after. Okay? He had influence and power by way of the fact that he was a majority of the economy in his area. Okay? But then on top of that, because he let his yeas be yeas and his nays be nays, because he did business, in a righteous way, he did things in an upstanding way, then his influence in the community became, well, we'll go ask Job. He's always told us the right thing. Job's never lied to us. Let's go ask Job. Right? He could have been his day and age's version of a judge. Right? And hey, Job, what do you think about this? Right? Or this guy can't pay me, but he does have this. Do you think that that's okay if we do? Job could have been. I don't know. But Job was influential in the community. And because of that, Job wasn't ashamed of what he believed. Everybody knew what Job believed. Because when they asked Job, Job's answer would have been, well, this is what God says on it. Thus saith the Lord. Right? This is what has been handed down to us on what we should do before God. They didn't have the law yet, but they did know that they were sinful, that they needed to be repentant of it, that they needed to make, a sacrifice for it so that sin could be atoned for. They did know that man disobeyed God and that we shouldn't do that. Right? Everybody does come to the age of the knowledge between good and evil. Right? The age of accountability. And Job's saying, you know what's right and you know what's wrong. Do what's right. Right. Our pastor said it on Wednesday night. For him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. Job's saying, don't do that. Right. Do the right thing. Everybody knows what Job believed. Amen. And Bildad's sitting in the shadows saying, he's wrong. I don't agree with Job. And then when everything falls apart, he gets to jump in and say, ha, I told you, Job. I told you. Look at verse number 3. Does God pervert judgment? Does the Almighty pervert justice? He's saying, Job, does God judge wrongly? Is his justice wanting for anything? He's saying, so obviously you've deserved this, Job. And because you've deserved it, it means that you were wrong. And I'm right. Bildad's trying to exhort himself in the misery of Job. He's trying to take a claim or take a grab at what Job used to have in the community, the influence. He's trying to usurp him, so to speak. He's saying, now granted, this is just with Job, but he's trying to get Job to admit it so that he can go tell everybody else, guess what? Job said he was wrong. I got him to admit it. Right? That's what the hypocrite does. I'll get you to admit that you were wrong so that I can claim that I was right. They have no substance. There's nothing on the inside. They're just like those hollow reeds, that empty papyrus. But everything that they account themselves, everything that they believe they are worth is outward. If I can decorate the outside, people will think that I have something on the inside. Right here, he's trying to add some decoration by saying, if I can get Job to admit that he deserved what God gave to him, that he did something wrong. Well, Job would admit that, yeah, I deserved it because I was born in sin. I was conceived in sin. Right? Our sin nature is what separates us from God. I deserve a whole lot worse than this. I deserve hell. But that's not what Bildad's fishing for. Bildad's fishing for something that he can take back to the people and say, Job lied to you, but I'll never lie to you. That's the language of a hireling. That's the language of someone, a gainsayer, as the Bible, they say in order to receive gain. Amen. Right, a hireling, that they're just looking for a title, they're looking for a position. Bildad puts on the appearance, maybe he truly does care for Job. He may be his friend, but I hope that you've got better friends than this. Bildad's there. He say, Job, I know what's right for you, but what is it? It's empty. Obviously, you've done something. Well, show Job what he's done wrong. Well, I can't. But is God ever wrong? He presumes to know that God only lets bad things happen to bad people. Right? We know that that's not true. God let it rain on the just and the unjust. It is not God's plan that bad things happen to people. That was sin. For sin, there was no bad. For sin, there was no death. There was no aging. There was no, wintertime where things die off and then they're reborn in spring. Right? None of that ever happened. It was just one eternal blessed day. Right? We know that. But Bildad's saying, no, that can't be true because God only lets bad things happen to bad people. By that logic, Adam and Eve, who had never sinned before, they had done something bad to be tempted of the devil. They deserved it, according to Bildad's logic. Right? We can go and look at look at anybody that Jesus ever touched. Right? When the disciples walked past the blind man and said, or the Pharisee, who sinned? Him or his father? Whose sin caused him to be blind? Right? Jesus said Adam and Eve's. It was the answer. Right? But that sin was passed on to it. That's why that man. But maybe it wasn't because of sin. Maybe it was for God to be glorified. Amen. Just like in Job's life. But Bildad's logic and the hypocrite's logic is if I do right, good things will happen to me. Right? That's not faith. There's a Far Eastern concept that you have probably heard of called karma. Right? That's false doctrine. That says if you do good, the world will bring good back to you. That's what Bildad's hoping is true. That's what he's living his life by. His faith isn't that God will, be his God, that the Almighty will have his hand on his life. Bildad's living what he thinks is the proper way so that good things happen to him. Right? That's not faith. That's an investment scheme. Right? Job's saying, I'm in hook, line, and sinker, and I'm still going to live even though I have nothing. the way that I did when God gave me everything. But Bildad's saying, if you lose everything, it's time to change the way that you're living. If bad times happen to you, God's trying to let you know that you're not right, that something's wrong, and you need to change so that good things happen to you all the time. Right? The woman that had the issue of blood, Bildad's saying, well, 12 years ago, you did something really bad, and God's punished you ever since. He's not going to let a doctor, have the knowledge to help you, because you haven't gotten, if you get right with God, them doctors will be able to help you. Sound familiar? That's the teachings, that's the logic, that's the, promise that a lot of false religions have today. Well, if you're right with God, if your faith's strong enough, if you give enough, if you do enough, then everything will be right between you and God, and everything will be wonderful. Yeah. But Bildad's praying, he doesn't have a bad day. You want to know why Bildad's praying he doesn't have a bad day? Because he's a stick in the mud. He's empty on the inside. He's dead. If Bildad has a bad day, that means everything that he has ever done is wrong. Amen. Everything that he tells Job, go seek the wisdom of everybody else. Right? Go back to the old paths of man, not the old paths of God. He's saying, Job, God never gets anything wrong. So if you have a bad day, it's because you've done something wrong. Sure. Job, what you've believed obviously isn't right, because if it was right, God wouldn't have let this happen to you. But you should do the thing the way that I do it. I want to take your place in the community because I can lead these people. I can show them a better example for God. Amen. But the first time that Bildad has a bad day, he realizes, according to his own logic, well, I was wrong. What did I do? And then he's miserable. It's green real quick, just like verse number 13, or verse number 12. Whilst it is yet in its greenness and not cut down, it withereth before any other herb. Nothing happens to it. If natural course continues to go on, that reed's going to get brown real quick. It gets ripe real quick, but it also dies real quick. You can build something off of what Bildad is teaching here. Do this, don't do that. If you have a bad day, it's your fault. It's not that, God's trying to do something in your life. You've done something wrong. Why can you build something off of that? Because that makes sense to man. If I do something good, good things should happen to me. If I do something bad, bad things should happen to me. That's what the criminal justice system is built on. Okay? But he's saying, I'm not the one. What he's trying to get away with is, I'm judging you, but I'm going to say that it's the judgment of God, that this is God's justice. And God's never wrong. You could build something on that. There are mega churches all over the country. But the first time that person has a bad day, they die real quick. Because their spirituality is empty. Job went, sat in the ashes, said, God's still God. I've had a bad day, yeah. The worst day that may have ever befallen anyone. But Job still says, God's still God. Because he wasn't a stick in the mud. A stick is something that's dead. A branch is something that's still attached to the tree. Job was a branch. Outwardly, during winter, we just came through it, and a lot of tree branches still don't have anything on them, but they're still attached to the tree. They're still alive. May not look it right now, but give it time, it's going to bear fruit. That's what Job. But Bildad, he's a stick in the mud. He's trying to convince everybody he's still alive, but he's hollow on the inside. Sure. He's still green right now, but since he's fallen off of the tree, he's already dying, and he knows it. He's just praying he doesn't have a bad day, because then everybody else is going to know, according to his own logic, he's not right with God. Right? A stick in the mud is a stick in the mud because nobody wanted to pick it up. If it was valuable, it wouldn't be a stick in the mud. It'd be a stick in somebody's hand. It'd be a stick on a kindling pile somewhere. Right? It'd be a stick that somebody's whittling away to turn it into a tool. But it's a stick in the mud because it doesn't want to go anywhere. Nobody wants to move it. But it does know, well, you need mud to grow. You need water to grow. If I can convince people that where I am is where they need to be, then I don't have to move. I don't have to do anything. That's the hypocrite. And Bildad's there to tell Job, well, Job, I care about you. But really he's saying, I care about tearing you down so I can build myself up. I'm here to show that you're hollow so that I can convince people that I'm full. Because when Bildad lays his head down at night, he knows that something's missing. He doesn't have peace. Amen. Every night, as Job, lived the life that was right before God before him, he's wondered, what's Job got that I don't have? And now he gets the opportunity on the first bad day that Job's ever visibly had, outwardly. He could say, I know Job's had a bad day today. That means he's not right with God. Think of how many days before this he's standing there and he's thinking, you know what, I wonder if Job's having a bad day today. I'm looking for signs that something's wrong in Job's life. Because that's the final trait of a hypocrite. They're always looking outwardly but never inwardly. Because inwardly, they have to admit something's not there. They're just a stick in the mud. They're clouds that hold no water. Right? Broken cisterns. They can whitewash the outside of them, make them look like, hey, that's something nice. Right? That's a reservoir. That's a well or an oasis in a time of thirst, but you get on the other side of it and it's empty. I can promise you a drink, but I've got nothing that, will actually satisfy you. Amen. That's what Bildad's saying. Job, on the other hand, he gets to rebuking them here in a little bit. But Bildad's missing what Job's saying. Job, as he's talking before this in chapter 7 and 8, his plight, his peril is the fact that he's searching, he's listening, he's seeking God, but he hadn't found anything. Job's grieving over the fact that he's lost his children, that he's lost a lot of things. He says that he's going to lay down in the dust when he goes to sleep. Right? Job doesn't have anything, but that's not what's bothering him. What's bothering him is that he can't get an answer from God as to why. That he can't get an answer from God on what's next, on where do I go from here. What would you have me do? He's just going to have to walk by faith and do what he's always done. Trusting that that's what is right with God. But Bildad misses all of that, and he just sees that Job's moaning and he's complaining. And he says, Job, why are you complaining? Does God ever judge wrong? So shut up. I'm tired of hearing about how miserable you are. But Job's saying, I'm not miserable. I'm not miserable because I've lost things. My soul is grieved because I don't have fellowship with God. He's saying, I can't find God, and that's what bothers me. But he's saying, I did find him yesterday, or the day before that, or the day before that. He's saying, I'm just going to stick by the stuff until he says something. But Bildad's saying, I don't need God to tell me anything, because he's never heard from God, because he's hollow on the inside. But he's saying, but I'll do what I think's right, and as long as bad things don't happen to me, then I'm justified. And they'll jump all over you when you have, because something bad has happened. But again, extraordinary trials doesn't mean that there's extraordinary sin. It just shows that there's an extraordinary opportunity for God's extraordinary grace to show forth.